Afternoon, AP Euro folks. First installment of In Case You Missed It. Making our way through the French Revolution and also the Industrial Revolution here in Unit 4. We're going to split it up this way. I'm going to have a video that's the Industrial Revolution. That'll be part 1. Then we're going to have a part 2 that's kind of the moderate phase of the Revolution. And then we'll move on to the radical phase in Napoleon and the period after 1815 after that. So I think there'll be 5 videos for this unit. This will be number 1. Hope you're having a good day. It's Friday afternoon, hanging out in the back room of Ludden Hall 201 in the crib. Okay, just sitting around. My voice is going a little bit. I have some water here. Might drink that in the middle. If I do, pardon me. Okay, study guide. There it is. Page 1, ready to roll. The first big movement on our study guide here is called the Industrial Revolution. And together, the Industrial and French Revolutions are called the dual revolutions because both of them have a combined enormous effect upon the daily lives of Europeans after the period, say, post-1750. Looking at the study guide, we're talking about Great Britain. Now, Great Britain is the first country to industrialize. We have a list of reasons why. So let's talk about them. Number 1, food production. The British are the first of the nations in Europe to really figure out a lot of those agricultural revolution techniques which are going to allow them to spend less time farming and more time diversifying their labor doing other things, like, for instance, factory work, which they're going to do in order to make more money. Capital. A lot of extra money sitting around in Britain. The early cottage industry has allowed people to get wealthy off of textiles, and they're looking for the next big thing. That next big thing? Factories. Entrepreneurs, we need some gamblers. You got to let a player play. You got to let people spend some money and take a chance. Now, I'm a rotten entrepreneur. I think more about the loss than the gain. But the entrepreneurs of the Industrial Revolution in England were always looking for the next big investment. They were good at finding it and getting money to it to make sure it succeeded. Resources. This is an island with a number of key resources. Number 1, above ground, you're looking at an island, and therefore it's easy to get to the ocean. The canal system that's built to go along with England's river system makes access to and from the inside of the country very easy as compared to their European counterparts. On top of that, you also have a lot of resources underneath the soil. A lot of coal, a lot of mineral deposits. They're going to be valuable in the industrial processes as we go through the late 18th century and the early 19th century. The government. The government in Britain has a lot to gain by sponsoring business. Many of the people who are in Parliament are the leaders of industry, and therefore passing laws that are friendly to industry really lines their pockets even further. On top of that, there's the growing notion that the government really shouldn't be that involved with business, that Adam Smith idea of free capitalism and a free market. And therefore, staying out of business and allowing businesses to do as much as they want to do is going to happen. Now, the downside of that we're going to talk about on the second page of the study guide, so that's coming back. Markets. Britain has a huge empire, and selling things to that empire makes it easier for us to continue to produce more and more goods throughout Britain. What problems necessitated the development of a steam engine? A couple of things. One of them is getting the water out of the ground. For all its ups and downs, England's a pretty saturated country. And if we're going to be talking about coal mines or iron mines, getting the water out of the ground as we dig becomes more and more of a problem. The steam engine and the pumps that go with it is the early answer to that problem. Making them more and more refined eventually is going to lead to using those steam engines to power looms and then eventually to powering railroad engines. So it's going to have a big effect in the long run. Thomas Newcomen, James Watt, and George Stephenson are all important in the development here of different engines. Right? Newcomen's going to develop the first steam engine. It's Watt who improves upon it by making it a much stronger engine and gets 4 times the production capacity out of it. And then finally, George Stephenson invents this thing called the rocket. The rocket. Which could go 16 miles an hour. Which is about twice the speed of smell. That is to say, it's not very fast. 16 miles an hour isn't that fast. But for 1830, that was going a mean clip, 16 miles an hour. And the railroad engines are important to the early Industrial Revolution because they transport goods from place to place and make for a cheaper product, hopefully. As those goods move more quickly, we're going to be able to make sure that the society is more and more profitable. The Crystal Palace. Not the Crystal Palace here in Bakersfield, where Buck Owens performed. Buck Owens. I got a tiger by the tail. something like that. I once went to the Crystal Palace and saw Brad Paisley, New Year's Eve, like 2001 or 2002. Was a great show. Brad Paisley did a nice job. I think I went 2 years in a row. It was fantastic. That's not on the study guide, though, is it? No. Back to the point. The Crystal Palace is this enormous exhibition in 1851 that the English put on to show the world just how cool they are. Basically, this huge glass and steel structure which housed all of these exhibits about manufactures. And the English put on this display, and it's all about how beautiful and wonderful they've done, and how fantastic they are as people. And we talked about this in class. There's this great quote from Queen Victoria where she says, we're doing God's work here. We're putting forward this huge industrial progress. Man, we're cool. Yeah. All right. Second page. Discuss the sanitation and food problems confronting urban dwellers. This is the other side of the Industrial Revolution, right? Literally, it's the other side of the page. But as we turn it over here, the Industrial Revolution is going to cause some real ruckus in people's lives. Sanitation and food problems. Cities were not built to accommodate the populations that they ended up having. So as people moved into them, there wasn't a natural system of sanitation built. There wasn't a public sewer system. That makes for a lot of bad things. Like, for instance, open sewers. Okay, there would be generally drainage of goods going down the street in open sewers. People would use the privies or the bathrooms at the end of the row. And those would be basically public restrooms for the whole set of houses. It is not until later in the 19th century that you're going to see public sewer systems really combating the problems. Food problems. It's very easy to get away with adulterating or modifying the food if there's not going to be a government oversight of it. That's one of the downsides of less government. That sounds wonderful on the surface, right? Hey, the government shouldn't interfere, man. We should be able to do what we want to do. Yes, we should. But then you start putting things like lead into food in order to disguise it as pepper or say that it's pepper. Or you take something like chalk or alum and you put that into bread and it makes it whiter. Or you use sawdust as a filler in meat product. The people don't know what they're getting, and we think that's a fabulous thing because the government's not getting involved. But if businesses can find a way to cut more and more of the costs and increase the profit, they're going to do it. And that means that the workers of the Industrial Revolution are going to get less and less nutrition for more and more money. What sort of jobs and roles did the middle class have in the new industrial economy? The middle class is in charge of really funneling the capital in the right directions. It's the middle class that's going to look for opportunities to invest money and invest capital, and doing so, open businesses or foster businesses that are already started to make sure that they're as highly profitable as possible. It's the middle class that's educated as engineers, businessmen, architects. All of those things go into this complicated puzzle to make the Industrial Revolution as profitable as possible. Working conditions would have been horrific. You're looking at long hours, right? We read part of the Sadler Committee results, or I beg your pardon, findings. In class, we read about that young man who's working 14 hours in a day, and he's being beaten, and he's making a very small wage, and that would have been very typical. Long hours, no control of the routine of life, right? When you were a farmer, you controlled how many hours in that day you worked, and that's not to say that your work was idyllic, but at the same point, you had control of what sort of a system of work you did. If you only wanted to work 6 days a week, well, then you worked harder on those 6 days and took the 7th day off. The factory doesn't have any days off. The factory doesn't have any time for sick. It honestly is going to keep on going with or without you. And if you're not there, you're going to lose your job. Men, women, and children from that lowest poor class are going to be working as family units a lot of the time in the factories and in the mines, and they're just going to get ground down. Some of the life expectancies for young men in those early industrial towns like Liverpool and Manchester, 17, 18 years old for men. They're just getting put through the ringer so badly that they're dead very quickly. Did the Industrial Revolution bring about an increase in the standard of living? Well, this is a debated topic, and if you're going to debate that it did, you can look at the fact that the people were getting reliable work. That unlike farming that could have an off year when you might have a longer portion of time unfed, at least with the Industrial Revolution there was solid work. And it could be worse, right? You take the example of Ireland in the 1840s where there's huge unemployment and massive famine. At least these people have jobs. It could have been worse if the people had lost their farming jobs and the factory industry hadn't exploded. You'd have massive unemployment. So in a way, yes, their lives are okay. If you want to argue the other way, though, it's really not until the Second Industrial Revolution, mid to late 19th century, that you start to see a valid improvement in the daily lives of people. Longer life expectancy, lower infant mortality, more calories consumed per day. All of those things are a real sign by 1900 that workers' lives are better then than they were in the period prior to it. That's the industrial part of our review, folks. In the next video, we're going to talk about the early phases of the French Revolution. Take care. Have a good weekend.